Control players denied.
Hey Control Nation, welcome back to the channel. I am your host, Dr. Red. This video is a presentation on card advantage and how it helps build Pokemon TCG decks. First, we will explain what it is and give some examples. Then we will talk about how to evaluate cards for card advantage. Next, we will give an example with all the concepts we cover, and then we will conclude. Please note, ladies and gentlemen, card advantage and its theory is just a tool. If it is useless to you, disregard it. It's here to help you think through your plays and deck building, as well as to give you more pleasure, resulting in deeper gameplay. I'm also aware the precise way this term is used will vary across TCGs, so I tuned it for the Pokemon TCG. Now let's begin. So, what is it? It's a term borrowed from Magic the Gathering, the game that the Pokemon TCG is based on. It refers to a game action that either generates more quantifiable benefits or resources to you than it costs, or a game action that takes away more quantifiable resources from your opponent than it costs. So you might think of it as the raw number of cards available for play. There is also something called virtual card advantage, which is the quality of cards available to a player. Your opponent may have a higher number of cards available to him or her, but they are not the cards necessary to win. Let's give some examples of these card advantages. First, for quantifiable card advantage, suppose you play Airy. Your opponent reveals their hand and you discard up to 2 items you find there. Because you can possibly discard 2 switches from your opponent's hand, you're netting 2 cards because your opponent is losing 2 and you are losing 0, other than the fact that you are playing Airy. Not only this, but denying your opponent the opportunity to switch out of the active might be crucial to your win condition. In a similar vein, for virtual card advantage, suppose you're playing Block Snorlax with the block ability. It states, as long as this Pokemon is in the active spot, your opponent's active Pokemon can't retreat. And you also have a copy of Pidgeot V with the Vanishing Wings ability. It states, once during your turn, if this Pokemon's on your bench, you may shuffle it and all attached cards into your deck. Now, say you have only a few cards in your hand and only 1 card left in your deck, Pidgeot V, and your opponent has more in both. You have a quantifiably fewer amount of cards, but your opponent has neither a way of escaping the active spot and KOing Snorlax, nor milling you into defeat because Pidgeot V recycles itself. Therefore, your virtual card advantage is greater. That is, the quality of the cards left is more valuable to you than the cards available to your opponent, because you can use your cards to win, whereas your opponent cannot. At this point, ladies and gentlemen, you may find yourself asking, but Dr. Red, why does card advantage matter to the Pokemon TCG? Well, young Grasshopper, the answer is simple. Because it can assist you in selecting optimal cards for your builds. For instance, when thinking of card advantage in general, ask yourself the following questions. First, how many cards did this card cost you? For example, Ultra Ball costs you 2 from your hand, but it might gain you a Pokemon that can quickly turn the game around. Second, does your opponent lose cards? Or rather, how much does your opponent have to deal with as a result of this card? For example, losing 2 switches to Airy forces your opponent to attach energy to their Pokemon in a hard retreat. Third, how many cards did this card gain you? For example, you can use Iono to reset your opponent's hand to 1 and draw 6 if you're not taking prizes. It can be devastating in the late game. Thanks, Dr. Ed, that's really helpful. But what else can I use to help me evaluate cards further? Well, young Grasshopper, there are 3 additional concepts you can use, and we'll give one larger example at the end tying everything together. You can ask yourself if the card is proactive or reactive. Proactive cards act on their own, meaning you don't need your opponent's cooperation. For instance, Judge. It states, each player shuffles their hand into their deck and draws 4 cards. It doesn't matter what your opponent is or isn't doing. Just shuffle and draw 4. Reactive cards on the other hand activate when a certain condition is met. Boss's Orders, for example, states that you switch one of your opponent's benched Pokemon with their active Pokemon. You can't use it until they have a benched Pokemon. The application here would be asking yourself, is it worth having Boss's Orders in my deck compared to another control card, if at all? Next is ceiling floor analysis. The ceiling of a card is the best it can be, whereas the floor is the worst it can be. Let's use Erica's invitation as an example. It reads, your opponent reveals their hand and you put a basic Pokemon you find there onto their bench. And if you do that, you can switch this Pokemon into the active spot. The best it can be is to put a useless basic Pokemon in your opponent's active spot. And the worst it can be is to do absolutely nothing because you don't find a basic Pokemon or your opponent's bench is full. Last, the pace of the card. Does the card speed up the game to a quick conclusion or slow it down and drag it out? In other words, does the card lengthen or shorten the game? You want to consider cards that greatly pace the game in your favor in regards to your overall strategy. And with Pokémon as compared to supporters, that would be one with high HP and good defensive measures. You also ask yourself, is my win condition a sudden win or a slow win? Which phase does this card end, or does it help end the game outright? Here is where late game finishers are key to strategy. Blood Moon Ursaluna EX, for example, fits the requirements of both of these subcategories in having high HP and a finishing attack. Now let's give an example tying all of these concepts together. Say you're deciding between Xerosic's Machinations and Airy. Xerosic's Machinations reads, your opponent discards cards from their hand until they have 3 cards left in their hand. You go through an inner monologue like this. Do I really want an Airy or Xerosic? Oh wait, no. Maybe I want another Nest Ball. Oh no. Ultra Ball. Wait, no. Boss's orders that I gotta have boss. Oh wait, no. Oh, maybe I'm overthinking this. You see the confusion here, and I've been there many times myself. Ask yourself instead, which card gives me the greater card advantage? And so the analysis begins. For quantitative card advantage, again, ask, how many cards did this card cost you? 0. You didn't make any sacrifices as you would, say, with an Ultra Ball. Does your opponent lose cards? How do they deal with it? In Xerosic's case, your opponent can lose 0 cards if you can't play it, but minimum 1 if you can, and a rather large 10 plus amount if you can time it perfectly. For Airy, it's a maximum of 2, and only items at that, but you do get to choose them. How your opponents deal with the loss of resources is dependent on what they lose. How many cards did this card gain you? 0, but your opponent will be losing some. Okay, what about virtual card advantage? Remember, it's the quality of the card judged by its value for the match. In particular, its phase. And because virtual card advantage is somewhat subjective, we cannot really say at this point. Are they proactive or reactive? Xerosic is reactive because you have to wait for your opponent to have more than 3 cards, preferably a large amount at that. Airy is also reactive because your opponent needs to have a hand at all, but we place an asterisk next to it because it's unlikely your opponent will be at 0 cards for much, if any, of the match. Next, ceiling floor analysis. Xerosic again allows you to potentially eliminate many sources from your opponent's hand, whereas Airy eliminates what is necessary for your opponent to win. And we are assuming that your opponents aren't discarding what they need to win for Xerosic. And at worst, they both eliminate nothing. Last is pace. In terms of speed, both shorten the game in eliminating resources, both can greatly pull the game in your favor, and both being control cards are highly defensive. Now for your win condition, Xerosic is typically best in the late game when you've outlasted your opponent and want to hit them where it hurts and forcing them to make do with less, though mid-game large hands can also occasionally feel the pain. But Airy can hit well late or in the mid-game when your opponents are trying to finish or enact their strategies. With certain archetypes too, like Charizard EX, you might even try it in the early game to hit rare candies. And last is it a finisher. Xerosic is typically a late game card, so it certainly can be, and as we just said, Airy is usually late game, but goes well in all 3 phases. So keeping in mind that the usefulness of any card is context specific, in this example, what's the conclusion about which of these cards you probably ought to choose for your deck based on power alone and card advantage analysis? We're giving the victory to Airy simply because you have the freedom to choose what your opponents discard against their wills, including potential win condition cards. Whereas with Xerosic, they can keep themselves in the game by maintaining a low hand and using up their valuable resources so you can't stop them. They might also have draw support on the bench. Airy is also a good choice in all 3 phases of the game, beginning, middle, late. In this way, we can now say that Airy probably provides a greater virtual card advantage overall as well. On a final note, keep in mind, ladies and gentlemen, when you're doing card advantage analysis, not all of the categories will apply equally, so use your judgment. You might even find there are other categories you want to add. Thank you for watching, ladies and gentlemen. What did I miss? Where am I wrong? Please leave a comment, take care of yourselves, and may God hold you in the palm of his hand.